Well, the situation in Egypt certainly historic. But what was the straw that broke the camel's back? The factor that led people to cry for revolution. A lot of people out there, well, they say it's simple. It was poverty and hunger. Some even look as far back as 2008, when the number of hungry and food insecure people in the world increased by 250 million. At the time, it was deemed the global food crisis, and everyone speculated on what could have caused it. A rise in oil prices, increased demand in India, drought in China. But one man is pointing his fingers at speculation itself, and mostly at Goldman Sachs. Earlier, I spoke with Frederick Kaufman, contributing editor for Harper's magazine. He also wrote this article, this book, A Short History of the American Stomach. He told me how this rise in food prices came about.
In 1991, Goldman Sachs came up with a new financial derivative for the commodity markets, and that was called the long-only index fund. And this was a new kind of investment that was made for people who wanted to put a lot of money in commodities and just let it sit there for a long time and let it grow. And this is really not how the commodity markets have worked. Really what you have are physical speculators and hedgers moving in and out of positions along with the seasons as the wheat comes and goes. But Goldman Sachs put together this new idea, this long-only index fund, where they would simply buy and keep buying no matter what the market conditions. In other words, if the price of wheat went up, in the past, people would sell at that point. Goldman would continue to buy. And they made this derivative product work very well for themselves over its first 10 years of existence. And then around 2003, 2004, 2005, when certain other fundamentals changed in the world economy, a lot of money started pouring into these commodity index funds. And what we're seeing today are the effects of the fact that now speculators are outnumbering the physical hedgers by about 4 to 1 in these markets.
And you know, I was kind of doing some research on this. I found an old article about the food crisis written back in April 2008, and it said corn doubled in price over the last 2 years. Wheat reached its highest price in 28 years. The increases are already sparking unrest from Haiti to Egypt. That was back in 2008. Is it possible that things got so bad that part of what we're seeing in Egypt right now was actually fueled by hunger?
Absolutely. I mean, what we've seen are food riots in more than 60 countries over the past 2 years. And in Egypt, really, over the past several months, the citizens there have seen inflation rates of 17% per month in the price of food. And so, of course, if all of a sudden you have middle-class people, young people, who no longer can afford protein for themselves, they can't afford fresh vegetables for themselves, middle-class parents can't afford to feed their children milk. This is when people get very angry. This is when people take to the streets. Clearly, this is a part of the whole. There's no question. We had regime change in Haiti because of this.
I think it's really interesting, the stuff that you are telling us about Goldman Sachs, and I mean, just how they continued to buy even though prices weren't going up, confusing the population. This seems absurd to the average person that this type of thing can happen. I mean, aren't there regulations in place to prevent these artificial speculations from happening, both in commodities and other areas as well?
Absolutely. There were regulations in place since this country's Great Depression, but of course there was this mania of deregulation throughout the 1990s, and finally by the end of the 90s there were exceptions made, not for the people in the commodity business, but for people in the banking business. Certain banks were allowed to take huge positions in commodities that they were never before allowed to take. And of course, this is what happens. The markets are now being controlled by imaginary wheat. Imaginary wheat being bought and sold by financial giants is controlling the price of real wheat. And so what we're actually seeing is we're seeing an issue in the world right now where there are constraints on supply. I mean, there's no question that in China, in the United States, and Russia, and Argentina, and Australia, around the world, there have been constraints on the wheat supply and on grain supply at the same time. Clearly, as a lot of people have argued, there's demand issues, such as the growing demand for meat and throughout India and the middle class in China. Added to this, however, and really spiking this whole thing, is this tremendous buy pressure brought on by the banks, who are seeing, well, in a world climate where people are generally distrusting currency, they're distrusting dollars. Dollars are being printed like crazy. They're distrusting euros. They're distrusting pounds. What is the classic hedge? What is the classic flight to safety? Commodities. And so we have this flight to safety. We have the supply and demand issues. Plus we have this kind of market subverting long-only index fund. And so what we're getting are these insane price spikes. And it's a vicious circle because, of course, the farmers themselves aren't making any money from this because they're losing their shirts, because even as they're selling grain for more, all of their inputs are costing more. Their diesel is costing more. Their fertilizer is costing more. They're not winning. The middlemen aren't winning. The Coca-Colas and the Domino's Pizza, even the Giants, they're not winning either because they're getting killed for the price of their inputs. Who's winning? Right, you got it. Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan Chase, the largest holders, the largest financial dealers in this, they're doing very well.
Gosh, it seems crazy that they're always the winner, no matter what game they seem to be playing. And thanks so much, Frederick Kaufman. Very interesting article that you wrote for Harper's, even it was a year ago, but still very, very valid today.